Welcome, my beautiful, wonderful listener, to the Talking About Talking podcast, where we talk about everything and anything, and we talk about talking about those things. Today, I am joined by Dave Epp. He is the Member of Parliament for Chatham-Kent-Leamington. He was first elected in 2019 and then re-elected in 2021. Thank you for joining me, Dave.
Good morning, Trevor. Great to be here.
Awesome. So, Dave, you mentioned that you were doing I don't know if you would call it a seminar or something, but just when I first met you there, you just got done doing something about listening.
Yes, well, it's a commitment I made in 2018 when I ran for the nomination. And the one I've upheld and tried to hold is that my role as a member of parliament is to take the voices of Chatham-Kent-Leamington to Ottawa. Not so much bring the voice of Ottawa back this way, not so much an Ottawa knows best policy. And so in order to do that, I have to meet people and give the opportunity for people to reach out to me. So, we have all of the digital tools. People can email me at any point. I've got great staff here in my Leamington constituency office, where I happen to be this morning, or my Chatham office, where I'll be this afternoon, or my Hill office in Ottawa as well. But really, we also have a number of opportunities, be it evening roundtables, be it coffees with Dave, simply to go out and listen. So that is one of the commitments I made when being elected, and it's one I want to continue with. We've got another 4-week run coming up in Ottawa where the House is sitting. I'm around in the riding this week, and then we'll have a number of opportunities through the summer where I'll be out, and then there'll also be scheduled opportunities.
So you have these regular scheduled things where you're out and about in different locations just for people to show up and talk to you.
Exactly. I don't quote me on the exact number. I think we're at about 56 since the beginning of the new year that we've had on the break weeks. It's an hour we'll set up at a coffee shop and just make it known through our mailings or through our social media that I'll be available. And so, people can come in, and it helps me stay in contact, and I can take with some legitimacy then the fact that I have spoken with constituents. They have come up to me. This is what's on their mind. Mm-hmm. And I can take that to Ottawa. And I do that in many forms, speaking in the House, but also in the conversations at committee and when the different issues arise.
That's pretty awesome. I like that. So what kind of strategies do you use when listening to make sure that you're listening properly?
Sure. Usually when you have an open public meeting, you say, okay, the floor is yours. It's hard to get things started. Usually once you have a meeting started, it's pretty easy to keep it rolling. So I will often have a subject or two, what are your thoughts on this? Or this is what happened this past week. Seniors issues often, with the payroll taxes going up April the 1st, there's an interesting discussion that we need to have as a society because our demographics are driving a lot of our economy. It was predicted back in 1980. Book that the lessons have stayed with me through most of my adult life was Boom Bust Echo by David Foote. That predicted a lot of the changes. We had the bulge of the baby boomers, and as they moved through their various stages of life, and I'm kind of at the tail end of that movement, they drove a lot of what our social needs were, be it expanded schools for a while, more universities, and then more golf courses. And now as that age segment is retiring, we're seeing the impact on the labor force. We're seeing the impact on our draw on healthcare. We're going to be seeing in greater numbers the draw on our social safety net system with the CPP, the GIS, the OAS, old age supplements, guaranteed income supplements. That's going to take an increasing part of our agenda. So how do we do that? Because we have a labor shortage. A generation ago, for every retiree, we had we had 7 people working for every person retired. Today it's about 3. And the program wasn't set up, and I always thought this too. Well, I've worked my whole adult life. I've paid into CPP. Therefore, I have paid for my retirement. That's not how the program was structured by governments of all stripes. It was set up to, basically pay as you go. We had this many people working, kicking this much in, therefore we could pay this much out. That's an oversimplification, but it really didn't account for the changes in the ratios of people working to people retired. Now, the governments about 10, 12 years ago did start to reimagine the program and start to build toward a much larger demographic being retired. We're living longer. That's all good news. But as we're living longer, we're also drawing on CPP longer. And when we have a shrinking, that's a bit of a misnomer because our population is growing, but in ratio, a smaller workforce, that impacts on how you fund these programs.
So when you're at these meetings, you would bring something like that up, and then people would start just
So
kind of ad-libbing on their different opinions about different sections of it and stuff like that.
Yeah, so you had the Harper government near the end of it to look at this and say, look, we're going to have to do something. People are living longer. Is it really advisable to have people only work for 30 years of their life, 25 to 30, live to be 100? Eventually we'll get there. We're not quite there yet. And then have CPP paid out for 40 years. So they looked at, not immediately, but over time, phasing in a retirement age of 67 instead of 65. Well, the Liberal government immediately repealed that. People didn't like that. It didn't affect people immediately. It was only on a go-forward basis. But so, what I often will do to the folks assembled says, governments have three options. One is they could look at what the Harper government doing is kind of expanding the amount of time people can pay in. That's one option. The Liberals rejected that, and what they're doing is basically say they're upping the taxes. They're increasing the amount that comes off your paycheck and the amount that comes off the employer's paycheck, which means it impacts the economy. Excuse me. And so that's the second option, to keep the program sustainable as you have more retirees and less workers. The third option, and I've had no one say that this is the way they want to go, especially in the face of the inflation we face now, is the third option is to cut benefits. So every government, if there's a fourth option, if your listeners have a fourth option, please encourage them to write to me. I'd love to hear about it. But those are kind of the three options I think that governments have to wrestle with this. This is not a fault issue. This is the fact that our birth rate now is 1.4 in Canada. Mm-hmm. Replacement rate is 2.1. So that's the function, or that's the problem.
Okay. So when you're in these meetings and you guys are discussing topics like this, and someone starts talking, to kind of hone in on my original question, what strategies do you use as an individual to make sure that you're listening to understand what they're saying?
Yeah, well, a simple answer is to remember the ratio of 2 ears and 1 mouth. And politicians' disease is they forget that ratio. They talk too much. And often I'll try and get a dialogue going. And I've had a couple of good meetings specifically on this issue. And I don't want to place this issue above all the rest. There's all kinds of issues that come up, but this is often one because the demographic that does attend, particularly in the daytime, tend to be more seniors because they have more time in the daytime. A lot of other folks are at their work. And so I'll kick that one out because it's interesting, depends where you are in your life as to which solution you might. And I try and get a dialogue going, and often we'll have people of different persuasions or people of different perspectives on an issue. And ideally, that's great for me to listen to. The challenge I have is, like I said, I want to take the voice of Chatham-Kent-Leamington to Ottawa. But what if those voices don't agree? And so how do you faithfully represent a disparate view on an issue? And so it takes time. We do live in a democracy. And a democracy is where the majority rules, but the rights of the minority are respected. I'm fighting a bit of allergies, so I'll have the odd hitch in my throat. I do have a picture hanging in my Ottawa Hill office, just as a conversation starter and as a reminder. January the 1st, 2014, the Toronto Maple Leafs played the Detroit Red Wings at the Big House in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's a football stadium that holds 105,000 people, or 110, I think, and 105,000 people attended. I was able to, at a charity auction shortly thereafter, buy a picture of that game. And the reason I have it hanging in my office is because it shows a panorama view of the football stadium of 105,900, I forget the exact number of people. Mm-hmm. Reminds me of that's the awesome opportunity I have and responsibility to take that many voices to Ottawa. And they don't always agree. Mm-hmm. And so how do you faithfully do that?
That's a perfect question, is how do you kind of conglomerate a collection of ideas on a particular subject? Right. And then you can't help but have your own biases in your own life because mm-hmm. you are the filter of that information, essentially. And I think that brings me to because that's really the responsibility of all politicians, right? As you are essentially, your role is to be the filter of the voice of the people, because not everyone can have influence individually on every little thing. The politicians got to get together and make the decisions. So large amounts of voices have to filter through single politicians, and then it goes down the line. And then that brings me to wonder, like, if, let's say there was a test, let's say there was going to be a prerequisite to becoming a politician, some sort of test or proof of confidence. What do you think should be tested?
Well, I'm going to tell you something. My answer to that question has changed since I've become elected. And I'm going to give you my answer that I thought before I was elected.
Okay.
I thought that someone who has the opportunity and responsibility to take on this role should have some life experience involving some responsibility. You should have either run a business or been a supervisor or had some previous roles on smaller stages where you were responsible for representing others, for meeting a payroll, some level of responsibility, basically as training and as proving ground. And I still think that is a very important part. And I guess that's probably a bit of my own self-bias because I was fortunate enough to be elected very young. I was elected at 24 to a local farm committee, farm organization, and then progressively had more and more opportunities to represent larger and larger groups on larger and larger stages. First then to a county committee level and then to a provincial level. Then the Crown Agency, I had the chance to be the vice chair and actually interim chair of that organization. I've chaired the school board. And so I worked with municipalities. So I've had those opportunities and actually represented Canada internationally, now that I think of it as well, in the processing tomato world. But I'm going to tell you something. In our caucus, in our Conservative caucus, we have some younger folks that are phenomenal contributors to our party, phenomenal representatives, hard workers, and they come with the exuberance of youth, but they are excellent communicators. The youngest would be a colleague of mine that was in his fourth year and ran for the nomination, won, and then beat all the critics around and worked his tail off and became a member of parliament at the age of 22.
And you're saying these people don't necessarily have that kind of background that you were discussing
life experience
before. Yeah.
That many of us do. But in further reflection, the parliament should represent the people, should represent the population of Canada. And so it should be diverse. It shouldn't just be white-haired guys and gals with life experience. It should also be a university graduate working on paying off his university debt. It should be, some young 30-year-olds that, are representing that millennial generation. And so our parliament, it's, if you were to take it to the census, I'm sure it's still skewed more toward folks with experience. But there's value in having those different voices inside a party. So we're a part of the Westminster parliamentary system. Right now, we're a part of His Majesty's loyal opposition. And it still rolls off the tongue a bit more difficult. I'm used to saying after 70 years, not that I'm that old, but Her Majesty. But our job in our parliamentary system is to loyally oppose, which means critique the legislation that's before in order to make it better. And so a wide variety of voices and perspectives helps with that.
That's such a good point. And that kind of brings me to something that I've heard mentioned and thought about a lot, is that why is it that politicians are predominantly like business people and lawyers and all that stuff, where's the farmers, where's the people that work in construct? I believe you have a farming background, and that's what I mean, right? Is like, what about doctors? What about people that are working in agriculture? What about people that are just all kinds of different things that would encompass our infrastructure of our society and how it functions, and people that are kind of masters of their fields that make that happen, so that you have scientists and everyone else making decisions as opposed to people that just know about business and law.
We would actually have a lot of agriculture folks, background of folks, particularly in the Conservative Party, because our strength has unfortunately been just more in the rural areas of Canada. So we've probably got at least a dozen folks that have been at one point or not primary agricultural producers or coming from the industry, which most people don't realize that.
That's kind of
neat.
Maybe
in Canada, I'm just going quickly through myself and my neighbor Leanne Rood would have basic ag experience. My neighbor, the other, Chris Lewis, industry experience, so it doesn't come from an academic field, but an industry experience. We do have a number of doctors in the house, one medical doctor on our side, and at least one, if not two, on the Liberal side. From the construction trades, I can think of a member from Manitoba who's come out of the construction industry, owns a construction business. There's a fair diversity of folks in our caucus. I'll admit I don't know the government caucus backgrounds as well, of where they all came from. A number of nurses, I'm familiar with that. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of a field in our society that's not represented. There's some that come from the social work side. Now, whether they're in the balance that we experience, in our society, probably not quite. Yeah, so it would be more, part of this job is comfort in putting yourself out there. So what it does do, I think it attracts different personalities, but a lot of us are, quotes, A-types. Enjoy people, are not afraid to, put ourselves at risk or put ourselves out there. And so, if you're a complete introvert, this would be a very difficult job.
Yeah, you're not going to be comfortable being under the microscope under such abundant scrutiny and criticism.
Yeah, it's said a less nice way. I got a thick skin and a thicker head. So.
Yeah, that's fair. So you're conservative, and conservative, I believe, is right, and then liberal is left.
Yeah, I don't particularly like the terms like that. There is a spectrum. And so if you're asking, what do I mean by conservative? It comes from a number of perspectives. A historic definition of conservatism is to preserve what is good and be open to change, but not to make change for change's sake itself. When it comes to fiscal matters, I would tend to put myself more fiscally conservative, meaning, and that's more from the business background, that over time, you have to be fiscally responsible. There's nothing wrong with debt. I am still in personal debt because of businesses and things like that. Nothing wrong, but you have to have a plan to pay it back. There has to be a value, and you view debt as an investment. I don't think that's necessarily as well understood on the other side of the aisle. So another way of coming at my philosophy from governing is, I believe the market or the market mechanism is the best mechanism for transferring the value of goods and services between people and between entities, as opposed to central planning and where it's a top-down and more of a socialist central approach.
Is that something that would be more liberal?
More socialist, it would be possibly. Again, what's the definition of liberal? It's classic liberalism, in which I don't think the Liberal Party of Canada is anywhere close to being a neoclassical liberal party at all. Because if you go back to the liberal parties of the founding of Canada, they were very much a business-oriented, market-oriented philosophy, and that's not what I'm seeing.
You see, I find all of that just so immensely confusing, because people will be like, oh, I'm conservative or I'm liberal or whatever, and I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Like, you're conservative, so you're part of this team, and then this team that you're a part of, you have all these colleagues on your team, and these teams are based on ideas and perspectives. And so you're supposed to just have certain ideas and perspectives if you're going to be on this team or if you're going to be on that team. That seems immensely problematic. Like, right, to think that you don't have any perspectives that conflict with anyone else on your team of conservatives, you agree with all of them on everything, that's insane. There's no way. And I would even say, like, even if you take the top 10 major topics, and you sit down with all of your conservative people that are technically on your team, you're probably going to disagree on a lot of things with a lot of different people. Right. So, like, what? I don't get all that.
So let's back it up to the Westminster parliamentary system that's come out of, our British tradition, where the purpose of teams, is to operate more cohesively in putting ideas forward and challenging them. That doesn't mean, to our earlier comments on how you filter 110,000 voices for myself, and now you're absolutely within the conservative team. There is a wide variety of perspectives and viewpoints, as there is with the liberal. I'm not as familiar with the range of ideas on the NDP, but I can make some probably educated guesses. And so that negotiation, that filtering process doesn't just happen at the riding level where I take the views that I hear. I now have to go, we meet as a national caucus every Wednesday morning for 3.5 hours, and we'll have weekend retreats, and we'll have a national convention coming up in September, where there's a full further process of people with different perspectives on the same team working at positions, working at how do we come at this. And no, we don't always agree. It's in that dialogue, in that debate. That debate occurs internally as much as it occurs externally. And it's that back and forth, because in the end, you need to come up to a consensus direction for the country, as a government of the whole. So that's what our whole Westminster parliamentary system feeds into. But even to developing the positions to oppose or support or look for amendments, that's a debate internally. So, and sometimes people just shake their head at the process. It's slow. It is slow, and it's cumbersome. But legislation and sausage are two good things. Sometimes you don't want to see them being made. It's something I put back to people. I've developed more patience ever since taking on a role with a provincial crown agency, because I come from the private sector. I'm used to the speed of the private sector. We make mistakes, we make a decision. If it's a mistake, we correct, course correct, make the next decision, and on we go. Governments, just by their very nature, operate so much slower because you need to have everybody feel a part of a decision. That takes time for consultation and even if you don't get your way, often as long as you've had your say, you can feel a part of the decision. And I've had to pull in the direction of a team with decisions I don't agree with. That's part of our system. If you ever played on a sports team, there's a coach, and sometimes the coach makes decisions. You're all on that same team and you don't always agree.
So you're saying that there was decisions made that your team made some decisions that you had to get behind because you were on the team, but you didn't fully support them.
Absolutely. And every politician will always have to do that. So the question is, how do you live with yourself for that? Well, I've had the chance to chair and be a part of many boards of directors. So I can live with myself as long as I've had the opportunity within our tent in closed confidential doors to air my view. And if that does not carry the day, you either believe in democracy or you don't. And so my job is to convince my peers of my perspective. If I'm unable to do that, then if I want to remain part of the team, must pull in that same direction, even though I don't agree with it. Now, if it conflicts with my personal convictions to the point that I simply can't do that, then I have two choices. I resign from the team or I quit. But you can't with integrity. I have an obligation to put my voice forward inside the tent. But if you're a part of the team, you go with the team once a decision is made.
That seems just bonkers problematic to me because, psychologically, if you take groups of people and you show them a line and then another line and then on one piece of paper and then a third line on a separate piece of paper, and you ask them which line is the same length as the one on the separate piece of paper, it's like a test that people can get in the 98th percentile. It's so easy. But then once you put them in groups of people and you put paid actors to purposefully influence the others to try and guess the wrong answer, the rule is 3. It takes 3 people talking the wrong answer to convince literally any amount of people. You can have 10 people in a room, you can have 100 or 1,000. 3 people being certain of dogmatically certain of the wrong answer is enough to convince the whole group. So you take that, and then the psychological fallacy that is silence is agreement, which is wrong. That's not necessarily the case. And then you take the variable of people being too embarrassed to not play along with the team or not have the self-confidence to admit that they disagree with something, or maybe they don't have the confidence to articulate themselves properly enough because talking is difficult. And like my fiance, she has dyslexia, and all the time she'll be talking to me and she'll be like, oh, this thing, and I'll try and help her along with it. And she's said how artificial intelligence has helped her get thoughts out because it's sometimes difficult for people to do that. And so then all of those variables added up, and then this idea that everyone has to go with the group consensus is just going to create abundant situations where you might just have the whole group agreeing to something that realistically 60% or more of them technically disagree with.
So I fully understand that, and that is group dynamics. That's human nature in almost all settings. And I'll say to a certain degree also occurs within our teams. The one difference, and then we want to cover this point earlier, is that the vast majority of folks that put themselves into this situation where you're under this much public scrutiny, we're A-types. We're not shy. And so very seldom will you have, we'll understand the concept of party discipline, but even with party discipline in place, and I can tell you without breaking caucus confidentiality, we're not shy, and we'll go to and we will disagree with each other, have strong personal relationships underneath, but we will loudly disagree with each other and debate that back and forth. And so those perspectives get aired, and then decisions have to be made. And I had another point in response and it just slipped out of my mind. There it was. I think Winston Churchill covered this when it comes now to our system of government, right? He basically put this as the Westminster system being the absolutely worst of any of them, other than all the rest. Because if you take away the party and the group systems, you can look to republics, so it's not we're a constitutional monarchy, but underneath we've got teams, basically parties. A Republican system does not have the monarchy, but basically has teams. You could say, should there be more teams, less teams? Should it be first past the post and things like that, or open debates? But what are the alternatives? Well, the alternatives is one person makes a decision, fascism or
communism,
top-down, or make it while we all have equal voices. While we do, but if you don't organize yourselves, let's take our House of Commons, 338 members, 338 opinions. How do you form a consensus? And that's one of the, there's pros and cons to first past the system versus proportional representation. Proportional representation leads you to many, many, many teams in the House. And I've had the chance to be in Peru, where there's 16 teams in their Congress. So the ruling party right now had 16% of the popular vote, but they formed a coalition. They were the largest group. And so you had one voter in 8 on the team that was ruling the country. And so somewhere in there has to be a balance. Here in Canada, we have 5 parties plus independents represented in the House of Commons. The US, you basically have 2 plus a few independent voices. What's the best system? And, over time, it can change. Media has a huge influence. Social media has affected all the dynamics between the teams and between us inside our teams. It's an open discussion. I'm open for alternatives that are better than the messy system we have now.
Well, I like to think that technology hasn't been utilized enough with communication, because it's just, so for example, the House, you mentioned the House of Commons, you can see on TV the Prime Minister and other people talking back and forth, and there's the Mr. Speaker or whatever. And so that you nailed it. That's my question. I do not understand it. I'm never going to understand it. It drives me insane that the Prime Minister, so you're conservative, you're not liberal. I'm going to go ahead and guess there's a lot of stuff that he does and says that you don't agree with. I do not understand that man. I do not love him. His perspectives just drive me insane. Some of his decisions drive me insane. The way he talks makes my skin crawl sometimes. With that said, a lot of politicians do in that way, but he's the Prime Minister of the country. If that man is speaking, I'm going to shut up and listen. I think it's just a horrific system that our Prime Minister, presumably what's supposed to be the most important individual in the country, is talking, and there's people shouting and booing. Excuse my language, but what the fuck?
Yeah, why? So there is a purpose for that. And this is not a new phenomenon. Actually, I looked at some tapes from about 20 years ago where the House was even more raucous than it's been. We just came through a 5-week stretch. And so whenever the House sits for 5 weeks, we get crankier and crankier, because we're all working 12 to 16-hour days and then flying back and home to our ridings on the weekend. So it's a long grind, and so people's tempers and fuses become shorter. The purpose, and what you're seeing, is question period. 1 hour out of 1 every day. That's not how the vast majority of government work gets done. The purpose of question period, in theory, is to hold the government to account, where the opposition has a chance to question the Prime Minister on Wednesdays and his ministers. What you're not seeing in the camera shots are the press, the media, and so sometimes the over-the-top theatrics from both sides of the aisle are designed for one thing: to attract attention to an issue, either through the media, today it's through the media. It was less rancorous or less theatrical before television cameras came in. That changed the whole style in the 1970s. Now social media has been amplified that much more, because you're looking for the clips. But the underlying purpose is to bring the public's attention to an issue. If you want to see how, I have stood and in some of that tone asked a question and had a parliamentary secretary respond with some indignation to how dare I ask that kind of a question. And we've both sat down and texted each other, oh, good one. And so you have some of that going on, because we're both fulfilling a role. And so while you see that barking back and forth, you see the chatter underneath the cameras also going on. At times it's emotional and charged, and at times it's more bantering. So if you want to go to parlview.com, and you can always click on question period, but go to some of the other sessions of government. Go to some of the speeches. Go to some committee hearings. Look at our Foreign Affairs Committee or the Ag Committee, particularly the Ag Committee. I enjoy that one because it's probably one of the least partisan, where you work at the issues. And you'll get a completely different tone of how government works. And there's a lot more time spent at committee working with witnesses who are testifying to government. That's what happens, right? A piece of legislation gets brought forward to the House by the government. When it's introduced, it's deemed to have been read the first time. Then it comes up for debate the second time for second reading. And then if it passes second reading, it gets referred to a committee. There's 28 standing committees of Parliament. And that's where 12 MPs, 6 Liberals, 4 Conservative, 1 Bloc, 1 NDP, attack the legislation. And by attack, I mean call in witnesses, explore amendments, work it through. And then as amended or sometimes hold, that piece of legislation comes back to the House of Commons for third reading for more debates. So what you're seeing is 1 hour out of every day, 46 questions of 35 seconds or less, where the questioner gets to ask, etc. And it often is about a piece of legislation in front of a committee or in front of the House, but it could be about the news of the day. Today, the House is not sitting this week, but at 12 noon today, the special rapporteur is going to bring his report on foreign interference. That will generate a lot of headlines. I can almost guarantee you on Monday at 2 p.m. when we come back questioning period, depending what happens at noon today, that will dominate the theme of questioning. But go to parallelview.com or CPAC or any of them that broadcast every word, every camera angle that's out there and watch your government. It is like watching paint dry at times, but it gives people a different flavor, because you're right. The vast majority of public believe that their 2-year-olds are running the country when they see them arguing in the sandbox called the House of Commons at question.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that it's essentially a play in a way.
It is a part of a process, and it's probably one of the most theatrical.
Yeah.
For purpose, not always necessarily good, and it goes too far, and that's the speaker's job to rein it back in when it becomes unparliamentary. So especially at the end of a session, the speaker does not have an easy time of it, but there is purpose, and there is 200, 300 years of tradition behind it for purpose.
The tradition is great and all, but if I might say, it seems kind of silly to be for part of the process of the decisions to be made for the country to be in such a, put simply, childish manner.
Sure.
Right. It seems like
no decisions are ever made at question period. It's never called answer period. It's called question period. Well, so there's no answers. There's no decisions ever made in question period.
There seems to be very little answers during question period.
And on that point in particular, I 100% agree with you, and it's one of the frustrations we have.
Yeah, and that I don't get either. Is like, why is it that someone's even allowed to not answer a question? Like, if I say, "What's your favorite color, Dave?" and you say anything other than a color.
Let me talk to you about the rainbow. And for 35 seconds, I'll do everything but answer your question.
Yeah,
and that was very frustrating, which also raises the emotional tone of the response.
And I don't understand why, when that happens, the speaker should just have the jurisdiction, I guess, to say, please try again.
Right. The speaker has a fair bit of latitude, both to the questioning side. Now, if the shouting gets too loud, he'll allow a minister or the prime minister to start over again in his response. Now, technically, the speaker does not have the jurisdiction to judge the validity or the fulsomeness of an answer.
Can we give him that? Can we just give him that little check mark?
Yeah, absolutely. So that requires a change in the standing orders, which needs to be done by consensus, and you'll probably have no government of the day, irrespective of any partisan color, agree to that, because part of the to and the fro, and again, you want the media to broadcast the non-answers. Here you have the opposition is raising a legitimate question as to when did they know about my colleague Michael Chong's family being, harassed, being influenced or whatever by the Chinese Communist government? And we haven't got an answer. We've spent entire question periods. So the public should know that the government's not answering that question.
Yeah.
That sends a message. But how do you do it? Well, you have to ask that question 26 times in order for the clip to be picked up by the national. And so it's broadcast because, the average Canadian thinks about politics 6 minutes a week. That's it. And so if you're in politics, immersed in it, how do you get your messages through to a general public that care a bit more around election time, around tax time, and these days, every time they go to the grocery store and buy groceries, but how do you get their attention toward, how do we address some of these issues? It's a long, slow process, but having the people there of a perspective that you agree with. I mean, everyone has that responsibility to cast their ballots.
Yeah, what you're saying, it kind of reminds me of a clip from Pierre asking about like the average cost of a home in Ontario or something, or in Canada, and them just not answering, and then him getting back up and going, how much?
Yes.
And then sitting back down. That was kind of hilarious. On that note, Pierre Poilievre, I don't exactly know how to pronounce his last name. Sorry, Pierre. Poilievre. Okay.
Poilievre.
It's my understanding that you weren't entirely supportive of him initially, but you are now.
That's correct. So
how did that change come to be? Or I guess based on our previous conversation, are you just following the team now?
So the Conservative Party, and I'll grant this to the Liberal Party, practice democracy when it comes to their leadership. So we don't appoint a leader. There's a contest. And so we had 4 people running to become leader. I picked the team. It was the Jean Charest team. The Jean Charest team did not win. That's how democracy works. And now what I will say is the Conservative Party under Pierre, he won so convincingly and has made me a convert, is that we have been as united as we have ever been in my experience. And so I've come to partisan politics fairly late in life. I became much more interested after my term as vice chair of Agricorp, a provincial crown agency, when I finished serving on that board, because I had to be nonpartisan. In fact, I was appointed by a provincial Liberal cabinet minister. I was appointed by the lieutenant governor, but I was recommended by the Liberal government to serve there. But I became concerned about the state of how some things were happening with an older government in Ontario, and came back and joined the riding associations, so the local Conservative organizations, both provincially and federally. And so that's how I became engaged fairly late in life. 2016, 2017, I became to participate. 2018, there was an opportunity for me to run for the nomination, so I took it. That was on my shoulders, not on the party, because the party remained neutral. I had 3 other challengers just to become the Conservative candidate. And so the local Conservatives then had to choose between Dave Epp and 3 other people that just wanted to become the Conservative. And then once that was done, then you have to heal your party, right? Locally, now everybody has to get behind my office or myself to run to challenge the Liberals and NDP. And so now we've won that. Same thing happens at the national stage. And so Pierre won convincingly. We have a solid, unified party. And I hadn't experienced that because the 3 leaderships prior to that were very, very close. If you recall, Andrew Scheer won by 1 percentage point over Max Bernier back in 2017. It was the first leadership I was participated in. And then Aaron O'Toole, second ballot, right? Second or there was even third ballot, right? And so you always had factions that were close to evenly matched. And when Pierre won so convincingly on the first ballot, you have the Conservatives sending a message. That doesn't mean that we don't have a variety of views. Pierre knows where I stand on some issues. I've spoken to him as recently as last week on some advice, but I respect his role as leader and I support him as leader.
Okay, so basically, initially you thought someone else would be better for the position and you voted for someone else. And then when he came into power, the combination of his dominant sweep into power, I guess, and his behavior now that he's been in power has kind of gotten you to a point where you're like, oh, wow, this guy's not so bad, actually.
Yeah, not so much good and bad. He has tended to come more from a libertarian, more from a very much less government perspective. My background would have been more on the progressive side of the Conservative Party. So that's where if there were clashes, it would be more philosophical. He has been very welcoming. He has been working with all parts of our party, and our party's unified. And so that doesn't mean, there aren't good discussions, but some of that camps has totally disappeared. And so I'm very, very optimistic moving forward.
That's awesome. But when it comes to local things with Chatham-Kent-Leamington, it's my understanding. So as far as my history, I am a ISA certified arborist as well as own a gym. It's my understanding that we're down to like 2% tree coverage in Chatham. And I it was only a couple years ago, I was working for a tree company, and
Yep.
there was word that someone brought to Chatham-Kent Council or something. I don't know what it was, but it was just an image of a tree that was fallen over in a ditch and the roots were torn up, and that it was like, this is a problem. And then they kind of went, okay, well, we need to just clear all the ditches of trees. And then they started doing that. And that's insane to me. Like, first of all, when a tree's over in a ditch, it's not a big problem. In fact, from a tree removal perspective, it's a lot easier. It's already on the ground. And it's
The
really,
hard part's to get there.
yeah, exactly. So it's like quite often not any more expensive to get it removed. And the tree coverage is already so low in Chatham-Kent. And then I was one of the guys for a while with a chainsaw on ditch banks, just
Yep.
chopping everything down. I would show up to a job site and they'd be like, okay, from this road, this many
Yeah.
blocks down, just kill everything. And I don't understand that, because if you look at it from a ecological standpoint, trees near water like that is exceptionally beneficial for like helping filter the pesticides and stuff like that, helping balance the nitrogen, create an ecosystem. And then if you want to talk about like snow and the dangers of drifting and stuff on roads, if you're driving on, like this past winter, we had some crazy drifting, and then I'd hit a section where the road was bare clear because there's just a bunch of pine trees over on the side. So why are we killing so many damn trees in the area?
Let me start macro and kind of work way back down. So, I mean, trees, everybody loves trees. I like trees. As a farmer, I didn't like trees growing irregularly, so I've cut down an awful lot of trees, but I've planted more than I've cut down in my life. So I come from the basic, squaring up farms just so the woodlots weren't irregular and encroaching, squaring up fields. So I've removed them. I've removed very, very wide, shelter beds, trimmed up, but then planted straight rows of trees, and then left other areas to go. So to me, I mean, that's more of a practical approach. First, you specifically mentioned creeks. There's one, I mean, no issue there, from a shelter, but from stabilizing the banks. Just so long as it isn't also, I mean, if it's a natural river, great. If it's actually drainage creeks, the reason you have drainage creeks is so that, in rapid floods, things can drain. So as long as that is maintained, by all means, there's no reason to, necessarily, cut down all the trees. You don't want that holding up the water so much. And this is, from a farming perspective, because your crops drown. There's a reason we have drainage, particularly here in Chatham-Kent and Leamington, so flat, the ground's so flat. A lot of these aren't natural water courses. They were created as a management technique to remove water. But, you've got the Thames River, you've got Sturgeon Creek, you've got all of our creeks, that's more of a natural phenomenon. So you've got two different situations potentially going on there. Trees overall, by all means, I don't want to get into municipal discussions because I do have to stay in my own lanes with tree cutting bylaws and things like that. Unfortunately, what happened, I think the moment tree cutting bylaws started to be put forward, that caused an awful lot of bushes to be cleared before that came into place because people did not want their rights infringed upon. I always prefer the carrot rather than the stick. If society wants more trees, wants more woodlands, how can society have them? Well, we have parks. We can expand our park system, which society pays for. We can incentivize private landowners to maintain them, whatever. I am personally just not so supportive of coercing private folks to pay the cost of what something society, voluntary, sure. So that's beyond that. I would venture outside the federal scope and should probably stay within my lanes.
So I like that idea. If I'm right, you're talking about providing like maybe monetary incentive or some sort of tax break and this is just an idea I'm coming up with that is like maybe to like farmers to maintain a certain percentage of tree coverage, or that they get some sort of benefit for hitting so many trees planted or whatever. Because like to me, that there's very little trees along the roadways, and that drives me insane because again of the snow and what that's going to do for the filtration of the pesticides and everything. And like, just
let me ask you on that question. Where should those trees be planted? On the road allowance that's publicly owned, or on the private property beside it?
On the private property, because to maintain them from the road is going to be problematic, because then their root systems could damage the road as well. And that's just a whole extra thing. If you put it on the private property, the farmer, I know they're losing money if they have to come in a little bit, because they're losing a big strip of crop, but that's where the financial incentive would be. I would say if you just off balance whatever kind of financial loss that they might have for maintaining the trees and then for the crop space that they're losing by just coming in a layer of one tree, I think that would be a reasonable compromise.
Yeah, or what about just expanding the road allowance so it isn't so close to the road and having them publicly owned?
So you're talking about like making the roads wider?
Yeah, not the road itself, but the road allowance, right? Because the road allowances are all 66 feet right now. So you have society buy the land off of the.
No, that's not going to work because you just talked about the water drainage systems that we put in and all the digging that was done to make all those ditches and stuff. So the amount of work and money that would be involved to expand that out and reposition all of those drainage systems, that just wouldn't.
I'm not talking about repositioning drainage systems, but you can certainly have the drainage systems are, if they're on private property now, they have been 1/3 covered by the public purse. Right, although usually the roadside drainages are already part of the public right of way. So I'm not talking. So if you've got it, the road allowances tend to go to the far side of the roadside ditch. So what if you just add another 10 feet of purchase that had the public that wants the trees purchase the land without moving the roadside ditches?
So you're saying having land, so not on the roadside, but on the
I'm not so much talking about the practicalities of it as I'm the philosophy behind it. And so I'm giving you a bit of pushback because I felt that personally as a farmer, and I think on behalf of the ag community, often they feel that we're less than 2% of the population or 1% of the population. You have society putting demands on externally without the compensation or without the recognition of the costs that's being borne by the 1% of society for the other 99.
Yeah,
and so coming at a public fair perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do like pushback. That's kind of what all this is about. And I think I had covered that by saying like monetary compensation for the loss of crop and everything. Yeah. I tried to get out ahead of that because like, to me, if it's a monetary thing, then fine, give them some sort of tax break that covers that. But at the end of the day, the trees are going to benefit everyone, right?
Right. I fully agree. So a tax, yeah.
And I don't know whether it's a tax break or a grant or I don't know, like whatever, however you want to calculate it, but just figure out a way to calculate how much yield they get in that section, how many feet you got to come in to plant whatever trees. And yeah, like it's all calculatable.
I agree with you. I just think that the number, after you've done that exercise, the public would not be willing to pay that cost at all because it would be much, much larger than people think.
Oh, I think it would be very, very expensive, but I think that's a small price to pay for, trees and oxygen and a better environment.
I'm very much supportive of trees. And as is the public, I find it a bit humorous, sadly humorous. I'm sure there's a word that covers that. But, you've had a 2015 pledge to plant 2 billion more trees by the federal government. I don't know how many trees we're in. I think we're getting close to 1,000 or 100,000, but basically they've almost done nothing of pledge. What people don't realize, if you ever want an interesting exercise, Google the following. How many trees are there in Canada? I mean, planting trees, noble thing. I've planted many more, but how many trees are there in Canada? Do a quick Google. Let's see what your Google says. Come on. And then you begin to understand.
Canada has roughly 318 billion trees, which cover almost 40% of the country.
Correct. And so now you have a Liberal pledge to address climate change by planting 2 billion trees. So in percentage terms, what's 2 divided by 318? Their trees are covered by
0.6%.
Correct.
Well done. That's some progress. Do that every year for 100 years.
Well, you see, you promised it in 2015. We're in 2023. We're about 2% of the way on that first promise.
2% of 0.6%.
I don't really the exact number. They're nowhere near. So.
Yeah, we'll say not very far along on making their 0.6% progress.
There you go.
Yeah, and then I think another part on this topic that people miss is that I don't remember the stat exactly, something like 5,000 tons of carbon or something. Right. One mature tree, when you cut down one big mature tree, there's just so much carbon released into the atmosphere when you do that from it breaking down and et cetera. And then people think, oh, I can just go plant trees because I cut down trees and then I'm, morally balanced or whatever. Yet, no, it doesn't work like that. You cut down like 100-year-old oak tree, you're going to have to plant
Totally
something
different.
like 1,000 or more trees. And then if you say plant 1,000 or say 10,000 little saplings, maybe in 5 or 10 years, those 10,000 little trees will be balanced enough for that one tree that you cut down.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. There's all kinds of ways of sequestering carbon. Again, the ag community has done so much of it over the last 40 years and changing their practices, more so in Western Canada even than here, although in Ontario we've done a lot as well by going away from the moldboard plow, by much more cover crop cover. Again, which society is just catching up to now as to what the issue is. I mean, agriculture moved that way partly for other, noble reasons, soil conservation and all sorts of other things. But that's, again, not widely or well understood. The same as, a political announcement of planting 2 billion trees is done for political purposes. Well, when in the context of, we got 318 now, we're going to move that number to 320, but it's going to take us 10 years to do it. Okay, well, are you doing it because of the environment, or are you doing it because you have an election coming up? Well, it's probably because of an election, because we've had 2 more elections since then, and you still haven't fulfilled the promise from the last one, but they keep re-announcing it because it's a good announcement. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't speak against the inadvisability of planting trees. Everybody should, and you're right, it takes time. Plant a wise person, you plant a tree for under whose shade you'll never sit, right? That is forward thinking. So I very much support that and enjoy planting trees, but don't be fooled by political promises.
Yeah, and I think more attention needs to be given to the big trees we currently have. We just need to be caring for them more, because replacing them is just so hard. There's a bunch of stuff that I would like to talk about all the stuff we've covered. There's been so many things that I've had side tangent questions for and everything. I really want to respect your time. It is 10:30. Yeah, and I really appreciate your time. So is there any final thing? And I would love to do this again if you're game for it.
Yeah, I would be, because, what this can be a part of is exactly the commitment I've made to constituents of Chatham-Kent-Leamington, is that to be available and to listen. And so I guess I've done more talking than I have done listening here.
Oh, it's all good.
But if this spurs responses, I'm open for that. So keep an eye in your mailboxes. We're just in the process of setting up our summer coffee tours. We'll be doing another round of passport clinics as well that have been very, very popular, and take advantage of those. We've tried to add them in the evenings as well. There's some early criticism that, we only have them during the daytime, Dave. Well, we listened to that. And so we've put up some evening roundtables as well to give all those, an opportunity. And unfortunately, we can't do it everywhere over the whole riding. So we try and pick a town or a city, and then we move it around over time. So try and get them on. I think we're at 56 public engagements or public opportunities so far in 2023. And so we'll keep working at that.
Awesome. That's great. So, and then if you want to do this again sometime, you just let me know. I'll email your people there.
Email my staff and we'll set something up.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts, Dave. I appreciate it. You enjoy the rest of your day, sir.
You too, Trevor. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye. Hey, you listening to this right now, yes, you. I appreciate that you've listened to it this far. That's awesome. And that means that you at least enjoyed it, or else you would have stopped it and went and done something else. And it would be really cool if you could share it with someone. I'm sure you know somebody that might also enjoy it. So just, hit the little share button, and there'll be like a link you can copy, and you can just text it to your BFF Jill. I don't know if you know a Jill. I don't know, just somebody. Just share it with one person, and I will be forever grateful. Thank you. Have a great day.